My name is Marissa Cole. I'm 35 years old. I'm sitting in my lawyer's office right now, watching the second hand crawl around the clock like it's dragging its feet on purpose. The leather chair creaks every time I shift my weight. The air smells faintly like coffee that's been reheated one too many times. Through the glass wall, I can see my attorney flipping through a stack of papers, custody forms, emergency filings, words that will decide the shape of my children's lives. My kids are safe. They're at my mother's house, eating grilled cheese and watching cartoons, confused but okay. They keep asking when things will go back to normal. Their father is in county lockup, and 2 days ago he told me, without blinking, I'm taking the kids to live with my girlfriend. Let me tell you how we got here. It was Thursday evening when everything cracked open. I came home from work expecting the usual chaos, shoes kicked off by the door, backpacks half unzipped, the low hum of the TV competing with the kids arguing over whose turn it was to choose a show. Instead, I walked into silence. Then I saw the suitcases. Not mine. Small ones. Colorful ones. The kind with scuffed wheels and cartoon stickers peeling at the edges. One was stuffed with my daughter's clothes, her favorite purple hoodie draped carelessly over the top. Another was filled with my son's toys. Plastic dinosaurs, a tablet, the pajama set he refused to sleep without. My stomach tightened. On the couch sat Lila, 7 years old, legs tucked under herself, eyes fixed on the TV without really watching it. Beside her was Noah, 5, clutching a stuffed dog by one ear, chewing his lip the way he does when he's nervous. "Hey, babies," I said softly, what's going on? They both looked at me, relief and confusion colliding on their faces. Before either of them could answer, their father walked out of our bedroom. He had another suitcase in his hand. He didn't look at me, not at first, just set the bag down and exhaled like someone finally done holding their breath. "We need to talk," he said. Of course we did. "I'm done pretending this is working," he continued, voice flat, rehearsed. "Maya and I are getting a place together. I'm taking the kids." Maya, his gym friend, the woman whose texts he used to tilt his phone away to read, the one he said helped him stay motivated during his evening classes, the classes that somehow never resulted in credits, certificates, or anything tangible at all. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs, but my voice came out steady. "Where?" I asked. He glanced at me then, surprised by my calm. "Her cousin has a rental. Nice area. Good schools." "Where?" I repeated. He rolled his eyes. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I said, "it matters." "About 4 hours north," he replied, "across the state line." There it was. Not the affair, not even the threat of taking my children. The state line. I kept my face neutral, even as something heavy clicked into place in my mind. "When are you planning to leave?" I asked. "Tonight," he said. "Maya's picking us up in an hour." I looked past him at my kids. They were watching cartoons again, pretending not to hear us, pretending their world wasn't being folded into suitcases 10 feet away. "Good luck," I said. He froze. Slowly, he turned to face me fully, disbelief etched across his features. "That's it?" "That's it. No fighting? No begging?" His voice sharpened. "I expected you to fight for your family." I almost laughed. "My family?" I asked quietly. "You're leaving me for another woman and taking my children. What family are you talking about?" He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and went back to packing. I walked to the kids and crouched down in front of them. "Hey," I said gently, "why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" "But Mommy," Lila started. "Just for a little while," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll come get you." They hesitated, then obeyed. The door closed behind them with a soft click. That's when he turned on me. "Don't try to turn them against me," he snapped. "I'm not," I replied. "I just think you should slow down and actually think this through." He laughed. "Maya loves me. She loves the kids. We're going to be a real family." "And your obligations here?" I asked. He waved a hand dismissively. "I'll transfer supervision or whatever. My parole officer likes me." I watched his confidence spill out like gasoline. "You need written permission to leave the state," I said. "It's just a few hours away," he shot back. "Stop trying to control me." A car horn blared outside. He smiled. "That'll be her." He grabbed the bags. I helped him carry them out, even shook Maya's hand when she stepped out of her SUV. She looked uncomfortable, eyes darting between us, clearly realizing she'd walked into something much messier than she'd been promised. "No hard feelings," she said awkwardly. "Sure," I replied. "Good luck." The kids hugged me, confused, clinging like they sensed something breaking that didn't have a name yet. I told them I loved them, told them to be good, told them I'd see them soon. Then they were gone. I waited exactly 30 minutes, long enough for them to get on the interstate. Then I picked up my phone and made the call. "Officer Reyes," I said when she answered. "This is Elena Ward. My husband just left the state with our children." I gave her the details, the vehicle, the destination, the violation. She didn't interrupt me. When I finished, she said quietly, "You did the right thing." I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where my kids' shoes should have been. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. "We have him in custody," Officer Reyes said. "They were stopped 45 minutes from the border. Your children are safe." I closed my eyes. Everything after that happened fast. CPS paperwork, midnight car rides, tears I swallowed until later. But one thing was already clear. He thought he could take my children and start a new life. He forgot the rules still applied to him. And he forgot that I would protect my kids, even if it meant ending his freedom. If you had asked me a week earlier whether I believed my husband would ever choose chaos over caution, I would have said no without hesitation. Not because he was loyal, not because he was kind, but because he was afraid. Fear had shaped our lives for the last year and a half, quietly, constantly, like background noise you stop noticing until it's gone. Fear of paperwork, fear of court dates, fear of one wrong step undoing everything we'd fought to stabilize. Or so I thought. 18 months ago, my husband was arrested for prescription fraud. He'd been working as a medical assistant, trusted with access he never should have abused. Forged scripts, painkillers, sold them to people he knew, told himself it was temporary, told himself everyone did it, told himself he was smarter than the system. He wasn't. A pharmacist noticed inconsistencies, signatures that didn't match, dates that overlapped. The investigation took weeks. By the time the charges landed, our lives imploded quietly, without drama. No sirens at the door, just an envelope, a court date, and the slow understanding that nothing would ever feel solid again. He got lucky. First offense, no violent history, a sympathetic judge, and a very expensive lawyer. A lawyer I paid for. The sentence was suspended. 2 years probation, 18 months parole, strict conditions. No leaving the state without written permission. Mandatory monthly check-ins with a parole officer. Random drug testing. Maintaining stable employment. Maintaining a stable residence. No new relationships that interfered with supervision. He hated those rules. Not because they were hard, but because they reminded him he wasn't in control. I was the one who drove him to parole meetings. The one who sat in waiting rooms with outdated magazines while he checked in. The one who tracked dates, reminded him to submit paperwork, double-checked addresses. I became the infrastructure of his freedom. And somehow that made him resent me. He'd roll his eyes when I asked where he was going, snap when I asked if he'd updated his parole officer about a schedule change, tell me I was hovering, micromanaging, acting like his mother. What he never said out loud, but showed in 100 small ways, was this. He thought the rules were temporary. He thought consequences were for other people, and he thought I'd always clean up after him. The parole officer, Officer Reyes, was professional, calm, unemotional. She'd praised his progress just a month earlier. "If he keeps this up," she'd told him, "we can talk about early termination in 6 months." I remember the way he smiled after that meeting. Wide, confident, like he'd beaten the system again. That was when Maya entered the picture. At first, she was just someone from the gym, a woman who helped him stay accountable, a name that came up casually, then frequently, then defensively. "She's just a friend," he'd said. "You're being paranoid. You're projecting." He started staying out later, claimed he was taking extra classes, claimed he needed space because I was stressed all the time. I was stressed because I was holding our life together with both hands. And while I was doing that, he was rehearsing his exit. He didn't see Maya as a risk. He saw her as proof that he was still desirable, still powerful, still the kind of man who could start over without consequences. So when he told me, standing in our living room, suitcases already packed, that he was leaving with the kids, he wasn't nervous. He was excited. He genuinely believed he'd figured out a loophole. "She lives close enough," he'd said. "It's basically the same region. Across a state line. Written permission required. Approval process mandatory. No exceptions." But in his mind, rules bent for people like him. And I let him believe that. When I said good luck, he heard surrender. What he didn't hear was resolve. After the kids left, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Like a hotel room after checkout. I stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a long time, staring at the empty shelves where stuffed animals used to live. That was the moment the anger arrived. not loud, not explosive, but sharp and focused. He hadn't just cheated. He'd gambled with our children's stability. And he'd done it with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a way that stuck. That's the thing about entitlement. It makes people sloppy. When I called Officer Reyes, I didn't embellish. I didn't beg. I didn't frame myself as a victim. I stated facts. He left the state. He took the children. He didn't have permission. There was a pause on the line. Then, thank you for telling me. That was it. No drama, no debate. The system didn't care about his feelings, or his new relationship, or the narrative he'd built where he was the misunderstood hero. The system cared about compliance, and he had broken it. I didn't feel triumphant while I waited for the call that night. I felt hollow, numb, like I was watching my life from behind glass. But when Officer Reyes called to tell me he was in custody, something settled inside me. Not relief. Clarity. The rules he'd mocked were real. The consequences he'd ignored were real. And the danger he'd put our kids in was finally being taken seriously. Later, when I picked my children up from the CPS office, the social worker knelt down to their level and explained gently that their father had to stay with the police for a while. Lila's hand tightened around mine. Noah leaned into my side, already half asleep. I signed paperwork with shaking hands, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was the beginning of something irreversible. That night, after the kids were finally asleep in my mother's guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I started a list: custody, legal counsel, therapy referrals, documentation. Because one thing had become very clear. The man I married didn't forget the rules. He chose to ignore them. And now, I was done protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on my mother's couch, listening to the quiet rhythm of my children breathing in the next room, every small sound pulling me back to the surface just as I started to drift. The house smelled like laundry detergent, and the chamomile tea my mom insists cures everything. Familiar. Safe. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment the SUV disappeared down our street. I kept thinking about how calm he'd looked, how sure of himself, as if the world would simply rearrange itself around his desires. At dawn, my phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How could you do this to him? You've ruined his life. I didn't reply. By mid-morning, there were more messages, missed calls, voicemails I didn't open. Everyone wanted to tell me what I should have done. Everyone wanted to rewrite the rules after they'd already been broken. I focused on my kids. Lila asked for cereal, then forgot about it halfway through pouring milk because she was too busy watching me. You're not going to disappear too, right? She asked. The question landed harder than any accusation. No, I said immediately, kneeling in front of her. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. She studied my face like she was as committing it to memory, then nodded. Later that morning, my phone rang again. Officer Reyes. We've processed him, she said. He'll be held pending the parole violation hearing. Given the circumstances, that won't take long. And the kids? I asked, even though they were sitting 10 feet away coloring at the kitchen table. You're the non-offending parent with no criminal history, she replied. There's no question about placement. No question. That phrase echoed in my head. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt like the ground beneath me wasn't shifting. That afternoon, my lawyer called. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Marissa, we need to move quickly, he said. Emergency custody filings, temporary restraining provisions. You need to document everything. Texts, calls, any attempt to contact the kids. I already started, I said. There was a pause. Good, he replied. That helps. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. This wasn't just about what he'd done. It was about what he had almost done. Taken them out of state, cut me out, rewritten their lives with a woman they barely knew. A woman who, according to Lila, had already told them what to call her. That evening, while I was tucking them into bed, Lila spoke again. Mom? Yes, baby. Dad said when we get settled, we won't need you anymore, because Maya will take care of us. I froze. I kept my voice even, gentle. And how did that make you feel? She shrugged, but her eyes filled. Scared. Something inside me hardened into something unbreakable. No one gets to replace me, I said quietly. Ever. And no one gets to tell you that. She nodded, curling into her pillow. Noah was already asleep, unaware of how close his world had come to being pulled out from under him. That night, I emailed my lawyer again. We need to pursue full emergency custody. No unsupervised contact. He told the children I would no longer be their mother. The reply came 10 minutes later. Understood. That changes things. The next day, the first official notice arrived. Parole violation. Interstate travel without permission. Removal of minor children during commission of a violation. I read it twice. The words were cold, clinical, unemotional. Exactly how the system treats people who think they're special. By the end of the week, he was transferred to county lockup to await his hearing. That was when Maya showed up. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch, eyes rimmed red, clutching her phone like a shield. "I didn't know," she said immediately, "about the parole, about the kids, about any of it." I believed her, mostly because she looked like someone who'd just realized she'd stepped into quicksand. "He told me you were separated," she continued, "that you were controlling, that you didn't let him see the kids." I crossed my arms, not angry, just tired. "We were married," I said, "living together, raising our children." Her face crumpled. "I would never have agreed to this," she whispered. "I know," I said. "That's why you're here, and that's why you need to leave." She hesitated. "What's going to happen to him?" I thought about the man who'd pack my children into suitcases like carry-on luggage. "The same thing that happens to everyone who ignores the rules," I replied. "Reality." She nodded slowly, like someone absorbing a lesson they never wanted. When she left, I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing myself one deep, shaky breath. Not grief, release. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Because the call I'd made didn't just stop him from leaving the state. It started a chain reaction he couldn't undo. And in the days ahead, that realization was going to hit him harder than any jail cell ever could. The first time I heard exactly what he'd been saying to the kids, it wasn't from a report or a lawyer. It was from my daughter, sitting cross-legged on my mother's guest bed, carefully lining up her stuffed animals like they were standing guard. She didn't look upset when she said it. "That's what scared me." "Mom," Lila said, not looking up, "Dad told us something in the car." I sat on the edge of the bed. "What did he tell you?" She hesitated, twisting the sleeve of her pajama top around her finger. "He said, when we move, things will be different." "Different how?" She finally met my eyes. "He said we wouldn't need you anymore, that Maya would take care of us now." There it was. Not shouted, not dramatic, delivered quietly, strategically, like planting a seed. I felt the familiar surge of anger rise in my chest, but I didn't let it touch my voice. "And how did that make you feel?" I asked. Lila shrugged. "I didn't like it." "Why?" "Because you're my mom," she said, as if explaining something obvious. "And he said we shouldn't call you that anymore." I took a slow breath through my nose. That wasn't panic talking. That wasn't confusion. That was intent. "Did he say anything else?" I asked. She nodded. "He said not to tell you because you'd get mad and try to stop us." My jaw tightened. "No one," I said carefully, "gets to tell you to keep secrets from me. Ever." She nodded immediately, relief washing over her face like she'd been waiting for permission to let go of something heavy. From the doorway, Noah watched us quietly, clutching his stuffed dog. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. His presence alone told me he'd heard enough to be affected. That night, after the kids were asleep, I called my lawyer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ramble. I stated facts. He told the children I wouldn't be their mother anymore. He instructed them to keep secrets from me. He positioned his girlfriend as their replacement parent. There was a pause on the line. "That's parental alienation," my lawyer said, "and it strengthens your case significantly." "Good," I replied, "because I'm done giving him the benefit of the doubt." The next morning, I received notice that he'd been formally charged with resisting during the stop. Apparently, when officers informed him he was being detained for the parole violation, he didn't comply. He argued, raised his voice, insisted they had no right to interfere. When one officer attempted to separate the kids from the situation, he stepped in front of them, shouting about his rights, his family, his authority. He didn't cry. He raged. And when that didn't work, he blamed. By the time they had him in handcuffs, he was still insisting this was my fault, that I'd manipulated the situation, that I'd forced his hand. That detail mattered, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd already suspected. He didn't see the kids as people with emotional needs. He saw them as leverage. 2 days later, the first call came from his mother. She didn't ask about the kids. She didn't ask what had happened. She launched straight into accusations. "You knew what you were doing," she snapped. "You set him up." "I reported a parole violation," I replied. "That's not a setup." "You could have stopped him." "I'm not responsible for his choices." She scoffed. "You're cold." "No," I said calmly. "I'm finished cleaning up his messes." She hung up on me. That afternoon, my lawyer filed for emergency full custody with supervised visitation only, pending psychological evaluation and completion of required programs. When I signed the paperwork, my hand didn't shake. Because once a parent tells a child to erase the other parent, there is no neutral ground left. That evening, while I was making dinner, Noah tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," he said softly, "are we still a family?" I crouched down so we were eye level. "Yes," I said, "we are, and we're safe." He thought about that, then nodded once, satisfied. That was when I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about punishment. This was about protection. And whatever happened next, courtrooms, hearings, accusations, I wasn't going to hesitate again. Because the moment he decided to rewrite reality for our children was the moment he forfeited the right to shape their future. The parole violation hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. No delays, no extensions, no room for theatrics. That's how these things work when the facts are clean. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to see him walk in. I wanted to understand, once and for all, whether he grasped what he'd done. He didn't look broken. He looked irritated. Wrists cuffed in front of him, shoulders squared, jaw tight. The posture of a man who believed this was an inconvenience, not a reckoning. He glanced around the room, eyes flicking toward me for half a second before snapping away. No apology, no regret, just annoyance. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled into silence. The prosecutor didn't waste time. Violation of parole conditions. Unauthorized interstate travel. Removal of minor children during commission of a violation. Resisting detention. Each point landed like a nail. When his turn came, his public defender stood and tried to soften the edges. A misunderstanding. He believed he had verbal permission. He didn't intend to leave permanently. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you request written authorization to leave the state?" she asked. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "I didn't think I needed to. It was just a few hours away." "That wasn't the question," she replied. "Did you request authorization?" "No," he said. "Did you receive authorization?" "No." That should have been the end of it. But he couldn't stop himself. "This never would have happened if she hadn't called my parole officer," he snapped, pointing in my direction. The judge didn't even look at me. "She didn't force you to violate parole," the judge said evenly. "She reported a violation after it occurred. That is not entrapment." He scoffed under his breath. That sound, dismissive, entitled, echoed louder than any shout. Officer Reyes testified next. Calm, professional, precise. She described the call I'd made, the stop, his refusal to comply, the way he'd tried to block officers from separating the children from the scene. When asked if he appeared confused about the conditions of his parole, she shook her head. "No," she said, "he was aware." The judge leaned back in her chair. When he was given a chance to speak, he stood. Not humbly, not carefully. He launched into a defense that sounded more like a grievance. He talked about stress, about being pushed, about how he deserved a fresh start. At one point he said, "I was trying to do what was best for my kids." The judge interrupted him. "By removing them from their home without consent, without authorization, with a woman they barely knew?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence. The ruling came quickly. Parole revoked. He would serve the remainder of his original sentence, 18 months, effective immediately. Additional charges related to resisting detention would be evaluated separately. No grand speech, no gavel slam, just consequences. He stared straight ahead as he was led away, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid, still not looking at me. After the hearing, his mother stood up and began shouting about injustice, about mothers being kept from their children, about how I'd destroyed her son's life. Court security escorted her out. I gathered my things and walked past her without stopping. Outside, my lawyer caught up with me. "That went as expected," he said. "Yes," I replied. "There will be a separate custody hearing," he continued. "He'll likely request visitation." "Supervised only," I said immediately. He nodded. "Given what he told the children, that's reasonable." That word again. Reasonable. It felt surreal how much damage had been done by choices that were anything but. That evening, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, helping Lila with her spelling homework while Noah colored beside us. Everything looked normal, but I knew better. This wasn't over, because men like him don't accept limits quietly. They look for someone else to blame, and when they realize the courtroom won't listen, they start pulling at the world outside it. Family, friends, anyone willing to echo their version of events. I tucked my kids into bed that night and kissed their foreheads. "You're safe," I whispered, more to myself than to them. But even as I said it, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from his sister. "We need to talk. There are things you don't know." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I locked the phone and set it face down on the table. Because whatever came next, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ready. I didn't respond to his sister's message right away. Not because I was afraid of what she might say, but because I'd learned something important in the last few weeks. Silence makes people careless. They fill it. The next afternoon, while my kids were at school and my mother was out running errands, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Maya standing on my porch again. She looked different this time. No gym clothes, no confidence, no practiced smile. Her shoulders were tense, posture stiff, like she was bracing for impact. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," she said quickly, "but I need to talk to you." I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit, just stood in the living room, eyes scanning the space like she was taking inventory of a life she'd almost stepped into. "I didn't know," she said again. "About the parole, about the kids, about any of it." "I know," I replied. "You said that already." She swallowed. "He told me you were separated, that you barely spoke, that you controlled all the money and used the kids against him." I nodded once. "That's his pattern," I said. "He reframes reality until he's the victim." She let out a short, humorless breath. "When the police stopped us, he didn't explain anything. He just started yelling. At them. At me. At you. Even though you weren't there." I didn't comment. "He kept saying you'd ruined everything," she continued. "That you'd planned it." "And that didn't concern you?" I asked. She hesitated. "It did. But by then, I was already in the car with your children. I didn't know how to undo it." That answer mattered. Not because it absolved her, but because it confirmed something. She wasn't a mastermind. She was collateral damage. "He never once asked if the kids were okay," she said quietly. "Not after they were separated. Not after he was arrested. He just kept asking what would happen to him." That was when I felt it. Not satisfaction. Confirmation. "I came to tell you," she said, "that I'm done. I blocked him. I won't be involved in this anymore." "Good," I replied. "That's the smartest decision you'll make." She nodded, relief flickering across her face. Then she hesitated again. "There's something else," she said. "Something you should know." I waited. "He wasn't just seeing me," she said. "I found messages, other women. Some from before you even knew about me." I exhaled slowly. "I figured," I said. She looked surprised. "You're not shocked?" "No," I replied. "I'm finished being surprised by him." She gave a small nod, then moved toward the door. "I hope your kids are okay," she said. "They will be," I answered, "because they're not with him." After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something heavy had finally lifted. The story he'd been telling was unraveling. And not just to me. That evening, his sister called. This time I answered. "I didn't believe you before," she said without preamble, about how bad things were. I stayed silent. "He's been lying to all of us," she continued, "about money, about his job, about why you were always stressed." I waited. "He asked me to tell the court you were emotionally abusive," she said. I refused. That got my attention. "He said if I didn't help him, he'd make sure I regretted it." There it was. Control. Threats. The need to dominate the narrative. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm done covering for him," she said. "And because there's more. Things that might matter legally." My grip tightened on the phone. "Like what?" A pause. "He's been writing letters from jail," she said. "Not just to you, to other people, making threats, talking about taking the kids back when he gets out, talking about how he'll fix everything." I closed my eyes. "Can you get copies?" I asked. "Yes." "Then send them to my lawyer," I said, "not to me." She agreed. When the call ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at the stack of school permission slips waiting to be signed. This was the part no one warns you about. Not the courtroom drama, not the arrests, but the slow realization that the person you built a life with was never who you thought they were, and that the damage they caused didn't stop just because the door closed behind them. That night, after the kids were asleep, my lawyer emailed. "We've received copies of the letters. They're not good for him." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them, because every move he made now was only tightening the net around himself. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to believe something I hadn't dared to say out loud yet. This wasn't just about temporary custody. This was heading somewhere final. The box arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. No return address. Just my name, written carefully, like the sender didn't want to draw attention. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Inside were his belongings, things he'd left behind without asking for them back. Shirts, a watch, a pair of sunglasses I'd bought him years ago. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped loosely in a grocery bag, was a tablet. I didn't turn it on immediately. I finished my day first, picked up the kids, helped with homework, made dinner, read a bedtime story. Routine kept me steady. It always had. Only after the house went quiet did I sit at the kitchen table and press the power button. The screen lit up instantly. He hadn't logged out. His email was open. I didn't rush, I didn't panic scroll. I read, thread after thread. Different women, different tones. Some flirty, some transactional, some disturbingly detailed. This wasn't infidelity in the emotional sense. It was systematic. Then I opened the email chain that changed the temperature of the room. A woman I didn't recognize. Long messages, measured language. She wasn't asking for love. She was asking for accountability. Doctor appointments, expenses, deadlines. And then the line that stopped my breathing, not from shock, but from precision. I'm not trying to interfere with your family, but you are the father of my child, and that won't disappear. I leaned back in my chair. Not dizzy, not emotional. Cold. I checked the dates. The pregnancy timeline overlapped with the last year of our marriage, with the months I was driving him to parole check-ins, with the nights he told me he was working late. He hadn't just cheated. He'd created another legal and moral obligation while already under supervision. And he'd hidden it. I kept reading. There were other emails, too. Not romantic. Operational. References to pills, quantities, payments. Not just selling. Buying. I closed the tablet, sat there in silence. And something shifted, not in my chest, but in my thinking. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. This was about risk. If another woman was pregnant with his child, that meant future custody disputes, financial instability, another potential point of access to my children, another way for him to create chaos. I looked down the hallway toward my children's rooms. They were asleep, safe. And that was the line. I called my lawyer. I have new evidence, I said. Affairs, criminal activity, and proof he fathered a child outside our marriage. There was no surprise in his voice. That strengthens your case, he said, especially regarding visitation. I don't want him having unsupervised access, I replied. Ever. Understood, he said. This supports that. When I ended the call, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt clear. The tablet wasn't just proof of who he was. It was proof that he would continue creating damage wherever he was allowed access. And I wasn't going to give him that access anymore. I powered the tablet down and placed it back in the box. Tomorrow it would go to my lawyer. And after that, it would become part of the record. The quiet evidence that didn't shout, didn't dramatize, and didn't exaggerate. It simply showed the truth. And the truth, in cases like this, is more than enough. The letter arrived on a Friday morning. It didn't come directly to my house. It went to my lawyer first, because after everything that had already happened, all correspondence from him was supposed to be screened. That rule wasn't a suggestion, it was a safeguard. My lawyer called me as soon as he read it. "Marissa," he said, voice tight, professional, but edged with concern. "I need you to come in today." I didn't ask why. I already knew. When I got to his office, the letter was waiting on the table between us. 3 pages, neatly written, calm handwriting, no visible rage, no profanity. That alone was a warning sign. He addressed it to the children, my lawyer said, not to you. I took a slow breath. "Read it to me." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He started with the first line. "My baby's daddy misses you more than anything." I didn't react. Then it shifted. "Mommy is keeping us apart because she's angry. She doesn't want us to be together because she's mean. But when I get out, we'll fix everything." My lawyer paused. I nodded once. "Keep going. When I'm free, we'll run away together. Just the 3 of us. We'll go somewhere Mommy can't find us, and we'll be happy again. Don't tell her about this plan. It's our secret." The room went very still. That wasn't desperation. That wasn't grief. That was strategy. I looked up. "This is enough, isn't it?" My lawyer didn't hesitate. "Yes." He slid another document across the table. "Attempted parental alienation," he said. "Psychological manipulation of minors. Implicit threat of custodial interference." I read the words detached. "He knows he's losing," I said. "Yes," my lawyer replied, "and this is what that looks like." He explained what would happen next. A formal motion to restrict all contact. A request to suspend visitation indefinitely. A recommendation for court-ordered therapy for the children. And if the judge agreed, a pathway toward termination of parental rights. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt resolved. That afternoon, I sat down with my kids. I didn't show them the letter. I didn't repeat his words. I kept it simple. "Daddy made some choices that weren't safe," I said. "And because of that, there are rules about how and when he can talk to you." Layla frowned. "Is he mad at us?" "No," I said immediately. "None of this is your fault." Noah looked up from his toy. "Is Daddy coming to get us?" I met his eyes. "No." Not harshly, not angrily. Just truth. That night, after they were asleep, I forwarded the letter to the court-appointed child advocate and the therapist my lawyer had recommended. The therapist called me the next morning. "This letter is extremely concerning," she said. "It shows poor boundaries and a willingness to involve the children in adult conflict." "Can you document that?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "thoroughly." The custody hearing was moved up. When the day came, he appeared via video from the detention center. He didn't look sad. He looked irritated. When the judge asked about the letter, he shrugged. "I was just expressing my love," he said. "She's twisting it." The judge leaned forward. "You instructed your children to keep secrets from their mother," she said, "and you discussed running away." He scoffed. "They're my kids." "That doesn't give you the right to destabilize them," the judge replied. For the first time, his confidence cracked, not into tears, but into anger. He raised his voice, interrupted, insisted the system was biased. The judge muted him. That moment told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about reunification. It was about control. When the ruling came, it was decisive. All contact suspended pending further evaluation. No letters, no calls, no messages through third parties. The judge's final words were blunt. "Your children are not tools," she said, "and until you understand that, you will not have access to them." He stared at the screen, jaw clenched, fists tight. Still no remorse. After the hearing, my lawyer turned to me. "This puts us in a very strong position," he said. "If he continues this behavior, termination becomes not just possible, but likely." I nodded. That night, as I tucked my kids into bed, Lila wrapped her arms around my neck. "It's quieter now," she said. "Yes," I replied. "That's because it's safer." And as I turned off the light, I understood something with absolute clarity. The man I married wasn't losing his children because of one mistake. He was losing them because, even now, he couldn't stop trying to use them. And that was something the law and I would never allow again. The custody hearing didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting, no grand speeches. Just a long table, a judge who'd already read the file, and a stack of documents that told a very clear story. By then, my lawyer had assembled everything. The parole revocation, the resisting charge, the emails from the tablet, the therapist's assessment, the letter instructing the children to run away and keep secrets. The pattern was undeniable. He appeared on the screen from the detention center, wearing a neutral expression that didn't match the gravity of what was happening. When his attorney tried to frame this as a misunderstanding, an emotional father struggling with separation, the judge stopped him mid-sentence. "This is not about emotion," she said. "This is about behavior." She addressed him directly. "You violated parole," she continued. "You attempted to remove minor children from the state. You resisted lawful detention. You attempted to manipulate your children into concealing plans to evade custody." He leaned forward, jaw tight. "You're taking my kids away." The judge didn't raise her voice. "You did that yourself," she replied. The ruling followed. Full legal and physical custody to me. All visitations suspended. Any future contact contingent upon completion of his sentence, a psychological evaluation, parenting classes, and proof of sustained compliance. No overnights, no unsupervised access, no indirect contact through family members. The gavel came down once. Decisive. After the hearing, his mother tried to approach me in the hallway. She didn't ask how the kids were doing. She accused me of being cruel, of enjoying this. I didn't engage. I walked past her and out into the afternoon light, where my lawyer was already on the phone scheduling the next steps. Therapy appointments, school notifications, security updates. That same week, another development surfaced. The woman from the tablet, the one who was pregnant, had filed a claim. Not against me. Against him. A formal action to establish paternity and secure financial support once the child was born. The court took notice immediately, adding it to his file as another indicator of instability and poor judgment. It mattered, not because of money, but because it showed the court that his chaos wasn't contained. It was expanding. Then came the call from the detention center. He'd been written up for altercations, verbal aggression towards staff, repeated claims that he was being targeted. No tears, no reflection. Just entitlement colliding with reality. His sister called me once more, voice subdued. "Our parents are in trouble," she said. "He borrowed money, lied about where it went. They're trying to figure out how to cover it." I listened, but I didn't intervene. Those consequences weren't mine to fix. At home, life settled into a different rhythm. Not easier, just steadier. Mornings were quiet, evenings predictable. The kids stopped asking when things would go back to normal. They started asking what was for dinner, what book we'd read, whether we could go to the park on Saturday. One night, Lila asked, "Is Dad coming back?" I answered honestly, "Not the way he was before." She thought about that, then nodded. Okay, that was it. No drama. Just acceptance. Later, after they were asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table and reviewed the final document my lawyer had sent over. A petition. Termination of parental rights. Not as revenge, not as punishment, as protection. Because the truth was simple. He didn't lose access to his children because he was unlucky. He lost it because, even after arrest, even after court, even after clear boundaries, he kept choosing control over care. I signed the document, carefully, deliberately, and when I closed the folder, I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. The termination hearing happened quietly. No audience, no theatrics, no last-minute redemption. By that point, the file spoke for itself. Repeated violations, documented manipulation, professional evaluations, a consistent refusal to accept responsibility. When the judge asked him a single, direct question, "Do you take any responsibility for the situation you're in?" he didn't hesitate. "I'm a victim," he said, "of her, of the system." That was the moment it ended. The ruling was final. His parental rights were terminated in full. No appeals pending, no visitation, no legal connection. The judge's words were precise. "This court does not sever parental rights lightly," she said, "but in this case, continued contact poses a risk to the emotional and psychological well-being of the children." The video feed cut off. He was removed from the room. That was it. No screaming, no collapse. Just the quiet end of something that should have ended long before. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. It became stable, which is better. The kids stayed in therapy. Their teachers noticed the difference before I did. More focus, fewer anxious behaviors. Lila started sleeping through the night. Noah stopped asking if someone was coming to take him. We took down the photos that made them uncomfortable. Not out of anger, out of care. Clean break, the therapist called it. I listened. I didn't date for a long time. When I finally did, it was slow, cautious, intentional. No rushing, no explanations owed. Just peace. One afternoon, months later, I ran into him by accident at a hardware store near the detention center. He looked smaller somehow, older. He asked how the kids were doing. "They're good," I said. "They're safe." He nodded, didn't argue. That told me everything. On Lila's birthday, after the party was over and the house was quiet, she came and sat next to me on the couch. "I'm happy now," she said. Not excited, not dramatic. Just certain. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's not scary anymore." I wrapped my arm around her. "It's never going to be scary again," I said. "I promise." She nodded. She believed me. I didn't ruin his life. I stopped letting him ruin ours. The consequences that followed weren't my doing. They were the natural result of choices made by someone who believed rules were optional and boundaries were negotiable. They're not. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Protecting your children doesn't require rage. It requires clarity, consistency, and the willingness to walk away when someone proves, over and over, that they are unsafe. We're not looking back. We don't need to, because the life we built after the chaos is quieter, steadier, and real. And that's more than enough.